Today in this PowerPoint, we will be discussing various career theories and how they relate to making occupational choices. On this slide is a list of various theories of career development. We will be going over each one of these theories in detail, and as we go through each one of these theories, I'd like you to think about what aspects of each theory relates to you. Rowe's theory of occupational choice is one of the career theories that we will be going over. This theory has its roots in psychoanalysis, so your childhood experiences matter. The psychological climate of your childhood relates to your career choices. So in other words, the quality of which your basic needs, so things like food and shelter, were met as a child will contribute to your career choice. So patterns of your childhood will play out in the workplace, and people will seek environments that relate to your childhood experiences. Additionally, parenting styles influence this career choice. So if parents were emotional or avoidant or accepting, will it influence that career choice? So something to think about with this theory is what experiences from your childhood might impact your career pursuits. There are, however, pitfalls to Rowe's theory. One of the pitfalls is that there wasn't much support for her argument that childhood experiences relate to career choice. There are plenty of examples out there of children saying that they want to be something and don't necessarily grow up to be just that. So given this, why do we study this theory? It is important to critically think about this and what we take away from this theory and what did it contribute. So take some time to think about this and see what kind of attributes you can get out of this theory and how that relates to you. The second career theory we will be discussing is Holland's theory of careers, and it can be defined as career choices are an expression of personality. And something that we know is that we develop stereotypes of occupations and how perhaps a stereotype of a personality trait might relate to that occupation. So you might have a stereotype that nurses are social or that they're investigative. And then we have 6 types of personal orientations in life. And these 6 types are a realistic, an investigative, an artistic, a social, an enterprising, and conventional. So these are different kind of orientations in life. And they make up perhaps different things that we do, our personality types, and develop kind of a personality pattern. So listing traits from most similar to least, so obviously that there are going to be some that we are most similar to and some that we are least similar to. And there's 720 different possibilities. Something to note is that this is a key theory and that it lays the foundation for the PGI. And the PGI is an assessment that you will be taking later on in the semester, and it will be interpreted as well. And it uses this theory as its core foundation. Next, we will be discussing Ginsberg and Super and their theories of career development. For Ginsberg's theory, it's based on the long-term process and made up of 3 different stages, one being the fantasy stage, the tentative stage, and the realistic stage. For the fantasy stage, this is where there's child play or there's role playing, so you see little kids pretending to be doctors or pretending to be teachers. For the tentative stage is when people begin to become aware of what they like. So perhaps when kids start school or high school students and start realizing that they like science or reading or math. And the realistic stage is when an actual career pattern begins to emerge. For the second theory, for Super's theory, this is made up of different stages. So the growth stage, the exploration stage, the establishment stage, the maintenance stage, and the disengagement stage. For the growth stage, this is where the self-concept is created. So when attitudes and behaviors are beginning to form. For the exploration stage, this might be where perhaps high school students or some college students can relate to, in that they begin to explore and research different occupations or jobs and begin to find out more about the world of work. The establishment stage, people usually find a field already and they try to begin to make it permanent. For the maintenance stage, the time is now spent holding on to your gain, so holding on to your occupation and working in that specific field or career that you found through the exploration and the establishment stage. And lastly is the disengagement stage, and where there's a deceleration in work. Traditionally in our society, that usually means retirement or kind of the end of your career life, and people usually start working a lot less. One thing to note, however, is that in today's society, most people don't maintain the same job or career for their lifetime. So that may mean something very different for the maintenance stage, as there could be more fluidity between the exploration stage, the establishment stage, and the maintenance stage as people begin to either change career fields or occupations, as that's something that's pretty common in today's society. Next, we will be discussing Crumbolt's social learning theory. And based on this theory, there are 4 types of influences on career decisions. One being genetic characteristics, so things like race and sex and physical appearance will all have an influence in your career choice. This theory also argues that environmental conditions and even special events might have an influence on your occupational choice. So things like job entry requirements or even natural disasters could affect that decision. Past learning experiences also act on the environment or could react to the environment and influence your career choice. And then lastly, your skills, your performance standards, and your values are all things that are taken into consideration when making these career choices. Secondly is that the career interest reflects learned responses. So in other words, that there are reinforcement from the social environment. So for example, if a person has no experience, this can be very negative or very invalidating for the person, perhaps not very reinforcing. Whereas a person with lots of experience can feel very positive or very validated, in return have lots of reinforcement from that in the social environment. The social cognitive career theory really focuses on self-efficacy, or how an individual develops beliefs about his or her capabilities based on his or her experiences. So these beliefs are generated from 4 different sources. This could be a personal performance or accomplishments, so what you've accomplished in your past, vicarious learning, so in other words, what you've learned from other people, social persuasion, and then physiological and affective states. So your physiology is things like heart rate, and your affective states are your emotional states. So one thing to think about is in what ways might self-efficacy differ across different ethnic, racial, or gender groups. And this is a topic that might come up again in the diversity module. So take a moment to think about how this might be different for people of different ethnic, racial, or gender groups. Cognitive theories of career development really look at career decisions as a problem to solve. And the ability to solve that depends on your knowledge of yourself and of that occupation. And really uses kind of 5 information processes to solve this problem. So this could be communication, which can be communication internally or externally, either with yourself or with someone else, and recognize the need that you need to make a career choice. There's also analysis. So there's research and observation to learn about skills and your interests and your values. There's synthesis, which combines information learned about the self and occupations, narrow options down. Valuing, which you set your priorities of those options. And then lastly, there's an execution. So once you've narrowed those options down, you set your priorities, you make a positive action or a positive decision. And then 3 is to reflect on self-efficacy. So we talked a little bit about this in the last slide. So having confidence or not, and how that affects your ability to solve this problem, and any type of self-defeating behavior as well. The personal construct theory is really a subjective view of career because it very much relates to the individual. So you construct your own view of the world, which we know could be very different for each person and changes with age. And your view of the world changes based on your life experiences. So as you grow older and as you mature and you have more experiences in life, this perspective begins to change. And through this perspective, a career theory is developed that's very individual to you. It is then tested, and one thing to do is to replicate the test that was used to develop the constructs to really test this theory out. But again, this is very much a subjective view and a very individualistic view of careers of and learning, leisure, and citizenship. Whereas you saw from other theories that this isn't brought up enough. There are 6 interactive life tasks. So finding work that needs to be done, mixing our life to create a meaningful whole. So you mix physical, spiritual, and emotional things into your occupational decisions. Connect the family with work. Value pluralism, so adapting to the many cultures in society. So in other words, things like diversity, and this is one of the topics that we will be covering later on in the semester. Managing personal transitions and change, and then exploring the purpose of life. So not wanting to give or dedicate your entire life to work and having more of a balance. So this is another reason why the integrative life planning theory is also called the holistic career planning model, because it integrates a lot more than just occupations and careers. It also takes into consideration other areas of your life. Lastly, we will be discussing the career construction theory. And this is a narrative approach to career counseling, and it's grounded in the belief that individuals use stories to make meaning out of their experiences and to guide them in making sense of their future decisions. So experiences are linked to help the individual better understand his or her choices and to strengthen his or her self-concept. So these are stories that perhaps are very personal to the individual and really talk about or really guide how they might affect future decisions or occupational choices.